Okay, we're good to go.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Marcy. So again, just a few updates that I wanted to share with you. The first update is in September, I had indicated that we would be posting our special education strategic plan progress review on the website. And so we have done that. So Marcy's going to just do a link to our actual website that gives you the strategic plan progress review. The first page just gives you some highlights that include some of the things that we've done since the strategic plan has been in place since 2019, December 2019. It just gives you some highlights. And then Marcy, if you could click on that last link to see the report. We did work with Hanover Research Firm to assist us with developing the report that we have shared with our Board of Education, of course, as well as Dr. Golson. Within the progress report, it gives you a status update of all of our goals. There were 3 goals that we have been focusing on. Goal 1 is really anchored in enhancing our special ed services. Goal 2 is really about our general supervision and monitoring of special ed processes and IEPs. And then goal 3 is really about narrowing the achievement gap. And so it gives you some enrollment trends, percentage of students with disabilities by grade level. On the next piece, it gives you some updates around goal 1 and then the number of action steps that have been completed, as well as some of the outcomes as it relates to either materials, instruction, staffing, etc. Goal 2 on the next page, again, just gives you some updates around accountability and our IEP monitoring and those things that we've been doing around that particular piece, as well as our action steps and around that progress that we have completed around completing some of those action steps. And then the last one is goal 3 on the last page that really gives you kind of where we are with our success and really working with our students. And I think one of the big pieces that I wanted to highlight in 2016, I think we had 3 reading interventions that we were using across our district. We're now at about 12. So that's been a significant increase, as well as professional learning processes and coaching with our teachers and administrators. And so we've given you a snapshot. Marcy, if you go back to I believe it was 2 pages before, I just want to also share with you that we did hyperlink that page. Yes, thank you. That we wanted to be able to share our audit results from the Maryland State Department of Education. One of the big things that you may or may not know is that all local districts in Maryland, as well as across the nation, are required to be monitored by their state departments of education. So I wanted to make sure that we hyperlinked that summary report that came from MSDE that shows some trend data, as well as highlighting our monitoring results in terms of our baseline data from 1920, and then what our data looks like in 21-22. There have definitely been improvements. However, we know that fidelity of implementation around accommodations, supplementary aids and services, interventions is something that we continue to monitor. And we know that that has been hyperlinked or hyper focused for us this year due to the number of vacancies that we are experiencing across the district. But I did want to, make sure that you were aware of our update for our strategic plan, and we'll be doing that yearly as well. The other update I wanted to share with everyone is around free tutoring that's being offered across our district. And just to make sure that you are aware that we are kicking off another Book Nook free small group virtual tutoring sessions for students enrolled in grades K through 5. And this is open to all students, including students with disabilities. There is, when Marcy provides you with the actual website or the link, you can register here once you actually get the PowerPoint so that you can see the different cohort groups and the amount of time or the time frame for those different cohorts where you can register for the virtual literacy tutoring. Marcy also just put the link into the chat so you can access that as well.
Trinell, we did have a question in the chat from Rob Malone. Is there a trend in the number of students taking advantage of those reading interventions?
I actually saw it in the Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually saw it in the report.
yeah, there is data that shows an increase in the number of students accessing the interventions. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to share with you, you know that we have entered into public partnerships. We're now going into phase 2 of our school construction in terms of our private public partnerships. And I wanted you all to be aware of the updates that will be happening with the named schools on this particular slide. I did want to point out specifically James Duckworth, which is a current regional public separate day school. There are plans to turn that special school into an actual comprehensive elementary school. As everyone knows, on the north, we have had considerable growth in population. And so there is, I just want to highlight that school will eventually be an elementary school, and we will house the regional program with the comprehensive elementary students at James Duckworth. And then our middle school students, as well as our high school students, will be going to comprehensive middle and high schools. But again, I encourage you to sign up for a Zoom link if you live in any of these communities, so that you can hear what the plans are. And so again, one thing that our team has really done is really kept our community well aware of updates and things that are happening, and holding virtual community meetings just so that everyone's aware of what the plans are in the school community. So I did want to make sure that you were aware of those school construction updates. And then just a reminder that we have developed a special education resolution team contact list, just to give you the support that you may need if there's a problem or concern that's happening with yourself as a parent, or I know we have some advocates on the line as well, and community members. So we provided you kind of with that resolution team contact list that includes members from the Department of Special Education, as well as transportation, pupil school boundaries, and other offices that we get frequent calls about, but we wanted to make sure that you have that contact list. I did share it in September, but again, I just wanted to make sure that you have that list to be able to call or contact those folks if you need assistance. I think there was another question that came in the chat. Oh, thanks, Sarah. She said the contact list is awesome.
And she did have another question about what are the different reading interventions being offered?
Yeah, so what I can do is I can provide that list when we post, send you the PowerPoint. I don't know them all at the top of my head. I know that we offer Spire, Corrective Reading, Lexia, Systems 44, Read 180, Spell Read, and that's only 6. So I know that I'm missing some, but I will make sure that I provide you with the list of the interventions that are being offered. The other thing that I wanted to share is that we have interventions across our district. So we have interventions that are for general education students, and then special ed has a specific list that we use. And the reason for that is because we have to make sure that a component of a reading intervention program has an explicit teaching component to it, and we just don't have students sitting on a computer for the entire reading intervention block. And so we did convene about 4 years ago, in 2019, a reading symposium group where we brought in experts across our state and nationally, Maryland State Department of Education, higher ed officials, to really assist us in giving us guidance, things that we should think about as we were revamping our reading interventions. And so one of the key pieces that we walked away from with those experts from Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, University of Texas, and others, was that we wanted to make sure that we're utilizing those high leverage practices. And one of the top high leverage practices for students with disability is to have that small group or one-to-one explicit teaching component, where we're actually redoing that reteaching of concepts or skills. And so we wanted to make sure that even if a reading intervention or math intervention had a computer component to it, that there was also time, the certified special ed teacher or reading specialist, to make sure that they're getting those reteaching and those learning of skills directly from a teacher or a specialist. But I'll provide that list to you when we send out the PowerPoints.
Thanks.
All right, that concludes my updates for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anybody has questions, you can ask them now. Oh, Dr. James has a question.
So, Ms. Bowman, the resolution list that has the contact information on it, right, that you showed today, and you also shared it in September. Can they answer questions in regards to like policy? And here's an example. I know that parents hire advocates and attorneys to work with them. And they sometimes, my clients or some advocates and attorneys have the parents fill out the release of information form. So the advocate and the attorney could talk to the school, right? And no one can answer this question. So if a parent fills out the release of information form for the school system to communicate with an advocate or an attorney, how does that work? I guess that's the best way for me to do it. Because some schools, they will include us in like the link for the meeting or any conversation that they have, even if the parent courtesy copied us when they sent the email out. And then some schools will say, no, that's not the policy. It's up to the parent to provide the link and information to you. So can you clarify that for me?
So typically we do, it depends on how we are communicating with the advocate. If we have a release of information, we do, directly can communicate with the advocate if we have that. And we would send a link, like, for example, if the parent has communicated that they would like the advocate to receive a copy of information that's being sent, we will do a courtesy copy. In terms of a written policy, is more of a practice, to be honest, Dr. James, than it is a policy. So I do want to clarify that. And I think that may be where there is some differences that has happened. So I can definitely take that back and discuss that just with my leadership team around that communication, because it is more of a practice in terms of how we are communicating or engaging. But before we can communicate with an advocate or attorney or anybody, we definitely would have to have that release of information signed to make sure that the parent has signed off on doing that. And so it could be different practices because we're lacking that guidance in writing. So that's not.
And I appreciate. I appreciate it because that's been my challenge. I appreciate first. Thank you for continuing the virtual for the parents because it's working out for families to really participate and they don't have to physically leave their job to participate. So I want to thank you for that. I really do. Let me say that. Thank you. And it would help my clients, and I think it would help other parents who have advocates if everybody speaks the same language in regards to, because some schools, they send me the information. Some schools will say, no, that's not the policy, and then somebody even said to me, well, you need to take that up with special ed leadership. So I'm just going to ask, I appreciate
Thank you, Dr.
addressing that.
James. Yes, I'll follow up with my team and talk about it. And I think sometimes, there's so much in terms of policy versus practice versus procedure. And sometimes we're operating in practices and you speak to one person and we're doing it this way. So as we hear information from the field, we try to tighten that information up to be clear so that we don't have, one school or one area doing one thing and another school doing another. So I do appreciate you bringing that to my attention, and I'll follow up with my core team to just have that discussion around that. I know for me, when I've communicated or I'm setting up a conference call, I always address, if the advocate is emailing me with the parents, I always address all, Mr. Smith and Dr. James, if I'm responding to you. So I always try to, as a, best practice, that if a parent has given a release of information, that I'm communicating, with both the parent and the advocate. If that's the request. Yeah.
And again, thank you. I appreciate it very much. I do. Thank you.
Okay, and Rob Malone has his hand up.
Yeah,
Rob?
Thanks, Sarah. I just had two quick questions for Trinell on interventions. One, is it typically for learning interventions, is it the family that actually makes the request for interventions, or is it a teacher? That's one question. The second question is, if you had 100 more students who requested interventions or needed them, does the school have enough capacity to support that in terms of continuing to grow the number of students with interventions?
So what we have done, and one of the areas that we noticed in working with our school teams early on, again, 4 years ago, is that our teams were not making the best decisions around the deficit students had and how to accelerate progress when they had a reading disability, right? And so one of the things that we have put in place is we actually have an intervention selection process tool that we use that captures the present levels of performance, any type of assessment data, any of our benchmark reading data, for example, we're looking at a reading intervention. So we have designed kind of a tool that at least allows school teams and IEP teams to look at a student's level. So for example, if you're impacted in the area of comprehension, reading comprehension, in these particular areas, and these may be the interventions that you want to consider. So it is definitely an IEP team decision in terms of in the context of an IEP team, in which they may recommend one intervention over another, and then that's discussed. And of course, the parent is part of that. The other thing that we do to really make sure that there is a link between, again, the student's need and the intervention is over the summer, we have a team of about 7 to 8 resource teachers that actually go through, because schools are required to submit data around the interventions that they're proposing or the IEP team has proposed, to make sure that we review that. That's again part of our general supervision monitoring process. Of course, we cannot overturn an IEP team decision, but we may say, in reading the IEP in the present levels, we notice that the student really has a decoding area, but the IEP team has chosen a comprehension intervention that's really heavily based on improving comprehension. And so we may give that note back to that school team to say, you may want to reconsider and reconvene an IEP meeting to talk about this, but this is what we notice in the data based on the student's performance. So that's how we look at that. The IEP team is always a team that would recommend any intervention or any type of services. And then the other piece of that, there's training, of course, that goes with any of our interventions. So before we turn a teacher or specialist loose in providing an intervention, they first have to be trained to make sure that they can implement that. And then we also have follow-up, what we call fidelity checks, where we actually go out and observe the teachers implementing the interventions to make sure that they're implementing it based on how the vendor has approved it. So we work with our vendors because in certain situations, depending on the bell schedule or how it looks, we may have to tailor how the intervention rolls out at a specific school or group of schools. And so we work very closely with our vendor. But at any time, if there's an increase in the number of students that require certain intervention, we do trainings throughout the year. So it may require additional teachers to be trained at a school, or it may also require us to purchase additional interventions. So special education does purchase all special interventions across the district, because we don't want that to be a barrier on a school's budget to give an access. So we actually, as part of our budget, we provide all of the kits, the materials, et cetera, that are needed for interventions.
Got it. So right now, no current restraints or constraints, should I say, on the availability of interventions for students?
No, depending on what the IEP team has recommended, based on the ones that we have. So we definitely, have tailored them and have them available. So for example, Read 180 Systems 44, we know that that's available across all of our high schools as an example. And so we actually have a Read 180 Systems 44 class that students actually can take for their intervention block at the high school level. That's
I was just asking, as we think about budgets and priorities and requests, if there was any more resources needed there, or if we're all good to go.
Yeah, I would say good to go.
Okay. Also, there's a comment from Rhonda Bullock in the chat here, and I just tried to click this link. She can't access the SEIS assignments link from the contact list, and I had the same problem. So that's
okay. Let me see if I can go in and change the permissions.
okay. Great. Well, it doesn't even like, I don't know. It doesn't act like there's a link on it at all. So. All right, so without further ado, I am going to introduce Emily Pasco, who is going to be talking to us about social, emotional, and wellness supports for students and families in Prince George's County Public Schools. So Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you all about what we have existing in Prince George's County Public Schools and also some new things that we're starting this year. So as most things in education, we look at needs on a tier-based level. So tier 1 are universal supports available to all students. Tier 2, we're starting to target individuals that are having more trouble with things like emotional regulation, problem-solving skills, behavioral difficulties. And then tier 3 are those intensive needs that we want to look at more specifically and really have a really targeted, specialized support for them. So to start from tier 1 mental health supports, we have district and school-wide mental health awareness efforts. So we do Wellness Wednesdays. You might have seen those in the PGCPS Engage newsletter. Our next one is December 14th. So I think it's 2 Wednesdays from now, and it is on kind of winter blues, overcoming holiday stress, coping with grief during the holiday season. And these are specifically targeted for parents. The first one was on bullying, the procedure and what to do if you're suspecting that your child is being bullied. The second one was on student mental health, and we had student panelists. So keep an eye out for those Wellness Wednesdays. Those are those district-wide mental health awareness events. On a school level, we have PBIS, social emotional learning curricula and programs, and mental health training and in-service trainings for teachers. So if you click the next slides, go ahead, one more. So these are some of the social and emotional resources available for all students by grade level. And if you have other questions about these, the school counselor or the professional school counseling department is a good resource. So we have Quaver SEL for elementary schools, Harmony, Safe Schools trainings for middle and high schools. And the Safe Schools training focus on youth suicide awareness, bullying and cyberbullying, alcohol, drug use and vaping, sexual harassment and digital citizenship. We have new second step for middle school starting this year. So that's a weekly curriculum in classrooms, and then Naviance as well for middle school. And then moving to tier 2 mental health supports, that's really, we're talking about possibly group check-in, group counseling for at-risk students, check-in, check-out processes, which are a little bit more informal, but still targeted. So kind of in between that tier 1 and tier 2, where a check-in might be with a mentor, maybe a preferred teacher or a counselor or an administrator, just checking in, kind of taking the student's temperature every week and seeing how their week's going and if they need to talk about anything or support before they're available for learning. Flash passes, a more specific homeschool communication system, and brief individualized interventions. These can be for things like problem-solving skills, executive functioning skills, things like planning, emotional regulation, organization. Those all fall under tier 2. And then when we get into tier 3, that's when we're talking about individualized to specific school student needs, such as individual counseling, group counseling for students with similar needs. So if you have a group of students who in 3rd grade who are having trouble with controlling their anger, it beght make sense to address that in a group setting, but still very specific and very targeted. Functional behavioral assessments and behavior intervention plans fall under this tier 3, and also crisis intervention. So these supports are most often for students who have been identified and often diagnosed with a social, emotional, or behavioral health need or diagnosis. So in terms of the different individuals that we have addressing mental health concerns in school, we have professional school counselors. Those are assigned to all schools. We have school psychologists and mental health clinicians. So I'll kind of go through each one of those. So professional school counselors, as I said, they're full-time at one school. And also a caveat to this, I know we mentioned the teacher shortage. There are shortages and vacancies in all of these professions as well. And administration and supervisors are constantly trying to fill some of these vacancies. But professional school counselors are full-time at one school. A lot of schools, especially at the high schools and middle schools, will have several school counselors full-time at one school. They deliver classroom social emotional learning lessons and prepare students for college and career readiness and transitions between elementary school, middle school, and high school. School psychologists often have multiple schools in Prince George's County. They're typically in each school 1 to 2 days per week. Their primary role is to administer psychological assessments for the special education identification process. And if we want to just click 2 more slides. And they assist with functional behavioral assessment process and creation of behavior intervention plans. Mental health clinicians are relatively new. We just started with adding these professionals in the past few years. They are full-time in each school, but not all schools have one. We do have slots for mental health clinicians and actual positions at all high schools, all middle schools, and all academies. But again, we do have some vacancies. So in total, we have 152 schools currently with a full-time mental health clinician. They're employed through partnerships with community mental health agencies, and their role is to provide longer term counseling. So about 6 to 8 or more weeks, just based on the need of the student. And the goal is for all schools to have a full-time mental health clinician by the 2023-2024 school year, so next year. And then these are some of the community partners that we are contracting with to fill these positions in schools. So some of them are from the area, and then others from around the state as well. So some of the critical functions of individuals on the mental health team, so again, includes counselors, school psychologists, and mental health clinicians. So providing counseling to students and families in re-entry sessions for suspensions, consultation with teachers and administrators, particularly about behavior and significant mental health concerns, classroom observations to support as part of the SIT 504 IEP process, and professional development for students and staff and parents. Also, the school psychologist conducts psychosocial evaluations to determine need of special education services and possible mental health supports from the school end, and support for crisis, behavioral crisis, and suicide intervention if a student is exhibiting or expressing suicidal thoughts. It's kind of all hands on deck for situations like those. Whoever is available, it will support, and everyone is trained in that. So another thing new this year is Hazel Telehealth. So this is in partnership with Hazel Health and Prince George's County Health Department. So it's a telehealth service that's available. We're in the rolling out phase, so it's not completely live yet, but we're rolling it out to middle school and academy students on December 5th and to high schoolers on December 12th. And then elementary schools will be rolling out in January. So it is completely virtual. It will be available for in school. So school counselors and school psychologists will be able to refer students if they think that they would benefit from a quick counseling session in school, and it will also be available to parents at home. So I will put a link for Hazel Health. Again, it's not live yet, but you'll be able to go in and complete a consent form for your child. If this is something, you'll be able to learn more information to decide if this is something you might want to be available to your student, so that when it is live, you can then have that as a resource and be set up to do that. Some of the topics that they cover are coping with anxiety, depression, grief and loss, low self-esteem, bullying, academic stress, and more. So again, you can fill out the consent form today, but you won't be able to refer anybody until the 5th or the 12th or whenever it goes live for that specific age group.
Ms. Pasco, I did have a question in the chat.
Sure.
Ms. Talley wants to know, so to be clear, if a student needs counseling around behavioral or mental health needs, the school counselor is not servicing those students. This would be outside the scope of their position. She just wanted some clarification.
So that was a question about Hazel Health?
It actually was a question about your slide before over the roles of professional school counselors versus mental health clinicians.
Sure.
And school psychologist?
Yeah, so really it depends on the staffing of the school. Schools really determine what individual is best suited to provide counseling based on their current caseload, based on their availability. So sometimes it is professional school counselors, sometimes it's the mental health clinician. In order to ask about that, well, I do have a slide on how to access resources, but it's not the same in every school. In some schools, the professional school counselor is seeing students individually and in groups, and in some schools it's a mental health clinician, some schools it's a school psychologist, some schools all, or a combination of any of the three. Okay. There are also evening counseling centers available. There's 3 locations: Parkdale, Largo, and Oxon Hill Staff Development Center, specifically for drug counseling as part of the Students' Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. And I'll drop a link in the chat after the presentation to more information about that.
And Ms. Payne also had a question in the chat, and she wants to know if Hazel Health is available for students in private placement like our non-public schools.
That's a good question. My instinct is to say that it would be, since they're still technically students of Prince George's County Public Schools. But I will definitely ask and follow up. Let me just just copy that question so I don't forget. But I believe it would be. Also, a note about Hazel Health is they are not providing services through the IEP. So that's something, if a student receives services on an IEP, they would have to be seen by the individual that's on the IEP, and that's school-based. So Hazel Health can be in addition to IEP services, or if, for example, there's a student with a learning disability that's also going through a loss, Hazel Health might be a good resource for them. It might not be something that needs to be put on the IEP, but certainly a support that might be needed in that moment. Okay, so how to access mental health support. So on the school-based side, typically an IEP meeting is a great place to have the conversation because you have the case manager there. You can request that a school psychologist or a school counselor be present at the IEP meeting before it's held, and have a conversation about what the scope of the presenting problem is, and have a focused discussion on how to address the problem, whether that's through counseling, through an FBA, or through maybe a check-in or check-out system. So often the first person you want to contact would be the case manager or the professional school counselor or an administrator to set up a meeting. And then in terms of community resources, we also have Prince George's County Health Zone is a great resource. If you want to just click. So it's the health department website, and you click on, oh, I didn't know it was going to go here, community resources. And then they have a service locator map, which I find is really useful for just accessing behavioral health supports in the community. You can search by where you live or where your client lives to get referrals for that. Okay, and there's also SAMHSA is also a great resource. They have another locator tool for substance abuse and mental health locators. So that's on the next slide. And I'll drop these links in the chat too, and they'll be in my presentation when it goes out. Oh, actually, there they are right there. Okay. And the SAMHSA one really allows you to filter by if you need specific substance use or more general mental health concerns. So which specialize in those. And also something that's new this year is there is a mental health email address. So if you have any questions about the mental health supports that are available or need any assistance with accessing community resources, you can send an email to mentalhealth@pgcps.org. And I check that email, as well as Dr. Faison, who's the Director of Student Services. So we check that a few times a week, and we will make sure to address any concerns you have through that email address.
All right, we had one additional question in the chat. We had someone who wanted to know, will Hazel Health have clinicians that speak other languages such as Spanish and French?
I believe they will have Spanish, but I will bring that question up again. And if they do, I think that certainly needs to be advertised. So thank you for asking that question. I'll make sure that we're still in the planning stages. So we do have a meeting with them, with Hazel Health on Thursday is our next meeting. So I'll be sure to ask that and make sure that it's communicated in future advertisements from Hazel Mental Health. Thank you.
Okay, there is another question much earlier in the chat. And I'm not quite sure when to ask this. I think I may ask this question during the general questions after Mr. Moody has presented. So does anyone else have questions for Ms. Pasco? Okay, well, why don't we?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, and now we're going to hear from Richard Moody about what parents and guardians need to know about bullying.
Mr. Moody, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
I'm muted. Good
There
evening,
you
everyone,
go.
and thank you, Ms. Torshan. I noticed when I was reviewing my slide that I didn't even put my name, my office, or my phone number on there. So I just put it in the chat for you. And when I go back and revise this, I'll make sure that I add in anything that needed to be included. And I will certainly be making sure it's available to the special education office. So my name is Richard Moody, and I'm the supervisor for student engagement and school support. Emily and I generally work together. She mentioned some of the other programs that are also in my office that I have oversight of. She mentioned alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs because that is one of the additional programs that is in our office and that we support. And of course, bullying, which is why I'm here tonight. So I thought I would just go through some slides and give you some general information, some things that just might be helpful as adults, as parents, as guardians. And I actually wanted to start with a snapshot of some data. And the data is from, you can see down at the very bottom, it says the data is taken from the 2018 Maryland Tobacco Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And that's a survey that's done every 2 years in all of the counties in Maryland. And Prince George's County usually has about 31 schools that participate. So we really do get a good representation of what's going on with our students through that survey. In fact, the survey is being administered right now in Prince George's County, and this is the last week to do that. And the data will probably come back in maybe next fall. They embargo it for a really long period of time. So we probably won't see that data until next fall, maybe next winter. They do ask questions about bullying, but they also ask students questions about alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, about their diet, about safety. Do you wear a seatbelt? Have you ridden in a car with someone that didn't have on a seatbelt? It asks questions about mental health. It does ask questions about suicide. It even asks questions about sexual activity and behaviors of students. The survey is administered in grades 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and it's done every 2 years. So just earlier today, I just pulled some data from the last iteration of the survey, which was in 2018. And one of the questions that I wanted to just point out to you was one of the questions on the survey said, during the past 12 months, have you ever been bullied on school property? Of the students that were responding to the survey, 13.2% of the students responded yes. 12.9% of the males responded yes. And 13.5% of females responded yes to that question. There was another question on the survey that I pulled. During the past 12 months, have you ever been electronically bullied? And of all the students that were taking the survey that year, 10.1% of students responded yes. So again, I just wanted to share some data with you that is generalizable to Prince George's County. We do get county data, but they do not share any school data with us. But we do get Prince George's County data, and you may find that helpful at some point down the road once it's no longer embargoed. So the big question, what is bullying? So I'm going to define bullying as unwanted, demeaning behavior among students that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. And I'm going to come back to that term in a minute. The behavior is repeated or is highly likely to be repeated over time. To be considered bullying, the behavior must be intentional and again include an imbalance of power and repetition. Bullying behaviors happen more than once or are highly likely to be repeated. So I wanted to go back to that term, imbalance of power, because that always kind of gets a little murky for a lot of people. And truly, when a situation is bullying, it's got people involved, maybe just two people, but one of them really feels like they have more power than the other individual. And if that could be perceived or it could be real. And that imbalance of power can manifest itself in any number of ways. It can manifest itself in actual physical size. It can manifest itself in social status. It can manifest itself in popularity. It can manifest itself in intellect. A student that is, has no problem getting A's and B's and is a star on the football team, and now is bullying a student that maybe does find it difficult to get C's. So physical size, race, intellect, popularity, all of those are the ways that this thing called power imbalance can manifest itself. The other thing that kind of gets a little tricky sometimes, and we've had discussions about it, the idea of repetition or highly likely to be repeated. So when I look at that and I look at the definition, the way that I look at it, and hopefully that will help explain it to other people, would be if I'm in the cafeteria and Richard walks past Mike and he's got his fruit cup and he throws 2 grapes at Mike. I'm going to see that if I'm an adult in the cafeteria, and what I should do is somehow intervene. So I might want to ask Richard, what were you doing that for? Why did you do that? What purpose did that serve? Or I may even ask Mike, the kid that received the couple of grapes, what was going on. It could be, and I could look at it and say, well, I think this might be bullying. But when I actually talk to the student or students, what I find out is earlier that day at the bus stop, Mike was eating an apple, and when the apple was almost finished, he dropped it in the back of Richard's hoodie. And some of the kids were laughing and stuff like that. And so Richard said, I'm going to get you back. And sure enough, he does, walk through the cafeteria, picks up a couple of grapes and throws some fruit at him. So now as the adult, I know that. And I know that these kids really are pretty grounded. They're pretty equal. They may or may not be friends. They were joking around. This is probably something that happens all the time. It's not bullying. But if Richard throws the grapes at Mike and Mike does absolutely nothing, and I go over to Mike and I ask Mike, what is going on? Why is he throwing grapes? Mike maybe doesn't want to talk, is not really forthcoming. But then I get something from Mike that is telling. And that this is something that, happens all the time. It happened earlier today. It's usually him and maybe a couple other friends, but mostly him. Now I'm really suspicious. And to me, this is smelling like it could be bullying. So I'm hoping that will differentiate for you what that language kind of means, because I know it can be a little tricky, but that's how I would look at it. And at all costs, when you see something and you're not sure as the adult, you definitely want to do some kind of intervention. That's what's going to tell you, no, this might have been a conflict between Richard and Mike, but these guys are clearly equal. They're always joking around. It could turn into a conflict. And things do, people joke around and it ends up turning into a conflict. But then when you also do your questions and your intervention, you may also discover that, no, this is not an equal situation. This is bullying. And then you know that you're probably going to need to file the bully report. Cyberbullying, I think we probably all know and have heard about this. Very much like bullying, cyberbullying is bullying that takes place over digital devices like cell phones, computers, tablets, and other electronic communications. Cyberbullying can occur through text, apps, online via social media, forums, or gaming, where people can view, participate in, or share content. It includes sending, posting, or sharing negative, harmful, false, or hurtful content about another person or student. It could also include sharing personal or private information about someone else, causing embarrassment or humiliation. And this definition is taken from directly from our newly revised Administrative Procedure 5143. And again, you will get the slides. So if anybody wants to take a look at that entire administrative procedure, you will feel free and be able to do that. So, big question. Well, how do you report suspected bullying? We actually have three ways right now that you can report bullying. You can actually use, and this is the way most people go, you can actually use the electronic bullying form that's attached to every school's website. So if you go to any school and you scroll down on their website, you will see a link that says student. And then once you click on that link, there'll be some other resources. And about midway down, you will see how to report bullying. So that form will be there. And the actual investigation form is also on there. So any adult could see that. And I also just want to make sure that everybody's aware that anyone can report suspected bullying. You're suspicious about it, you think it might be, you're not sure. It's going to have to be investigated. It may or may not be bullying, but anybody can report suspected bullying behavior. That could be the target student, certainly a teacher, a parent, a guardian, a friend, a sibling. Anybody can go in and report suspected bullying. The two other ways that you can report bullying through PGCPS, you can enter stop bullying at pgcps.org on your internet browser, and then you can report that way. Or you can also visit the Apple App Store or Android Google Play Store using the search terms PGCPS I Stop Bullying, and then you can just download that to your mobile device. And that will also is another way for you to report. But once again, probably a very easy way, and the way that I've seen most parents and most schools do it is through using the BHI form that's attached to the school website. So what happens if the report is filed? An investigation must be done by the school within 48 hours to determine the facts surrounding the incident. And ultimately, this investigation should determine whether it was an act of bullying or not. Sometimes it is bullying, and sometimes it is not. The investigation can include, but is not limited to, meeting individually with targeted students. I know schools that have reviewed camera footage. You can certainly meet and should meet with the alleged offender. You should certainly meet with the alleged targeted student. If there were any potential witnesses, interview those witnesses as well. And all the findings that are done through this investigation need to be placed into SchoolMax. And finally, once the investigation is concluded, the parents of both the targeted student and the offender need to be contacted, and they need to be informed of what the findings were and told if there's going to be anything put in place or what's being put in place for your student. So what happens after a report has been filed? If the incidents are determined to be bullying, the school must notify again the parent or guardian of the targeted student and the offender and provide them with a copy of the intervention plan developed for their child. And that intervention plan is a plan that is developed, yes, for the targeted student, but also for the offending student. School administration should hold several separate conferences with both the targeted student and the offender, and other interventions can include, but they're definitely not limited to, things like parent-student conferences or multiple parent-student conferences, behavioral contracts, continued support counseling for the targeted student, definitely, but also continued support counseling for the offender, social skills training, social emotional learning lessons, and support counseling for any bystanders. So what prevention methods are in place that we have in schools? And again, this is not an exhaustive list. Emily actually mentioned a couple of these things, and I can elaborate on them as I go down. But prevention methods that are in place schools should be doing and using, they should ensure that all students and staff are made aware of how to access the reporting app. I think that is pretty much taking place because people, students, and parents and school staff are really able to actually utilize the app. Review the Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook specifically as it relates to bullying. I know that our schools probably do this in the fall and then again in the spring, and they should emphasize the Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook and how it relates to bullying that occurs in the school. Continue to provide students with possible information on the appropriate use of social media. I do know schools that have had people come in from the outside and do small group assemblies or even large group assemblies on how to use social media responsibly and appropriately. And that is, excuse me, that really is something that our kids need to learn. So if anybody is out there in the community and they can find somebody that can come in and talk about that issue, I think it would be very much worthwhile. Holding routine classroom meetings with students involving ongoing discussions about safety. As Emily mentioned, in January, Prince George's County Public Schools will roll out Second Step in all middle schools. We currently have Second Step in a lot of our elementary schools, but it will be rolled out in all of our middle schools in January. We haven't set up the initial meeting yet, but I believe that meeting is coming up sometime in December, where we're going to iron out a lot of the details. There is a Second Step for high school, but it's right now being developed. They are going to do a pilot next year. And one of the questions that they've asked me already is, do you want Prince George's County to be a part of the pilot? So again, that'll be a conversation that I have with the counselors who are at the meeting, the Second Step folks, and my associate superintendent, Dr. Faison. Also, if you're not familiar with Welcoming Schools, we do have Welcoming Schools that we're rolling out in our schools. And Welcoming Schools is done through the Human Rights Campaign. And they actually have one module that is on bias-based bullying. And in fact, I just did my first one, I think it was last Tuesday. So those are going to be ongoing. There are more. They're in eDoctrina. I would certainly reach out to David Reese if you're interested in having Welcoming Schools brought to your particular school. But definitely that module on bias-based bullying is definitely something that's valuable. All schools are also encouraged to participate in various activities. And hopefully you really do know that this past October was Bully Prevention Month. And if you have any elementary students or if you visited an elementary school there was a lot going on in the elementary schools. They had Orange Day, Wear Orange Day. I mean, they've just had great things going on for the entire month and for that week. So again, we strongly encourage schools to participate in activities that support Bully Prevention Month. We do have a something that goes to the board. It's red. So we really are strongly encouraging that. All schools must develop and submit a school-wide bullying prevention plan. And that plan, when it's submitted, I believe in the fall, does come to student services for review. And then finally, this is a really new resource that's in place. We worked, as Emily mentioned earlier in the year, the Wellness Wednesday. The Wellness Wednesday was on bullying. And we had somebody, I can't remember his name. I think it's Roger Dinwiddie. And he's from Alveus, which is an international bullying prevention. They have an international bully prevention curriculum. It's highly researched. Everybody respects it. So what Mr. Dinwiddie did, he actually created a video just for PGCPS. And the video is about this thing called the bullying circle. And the bullying circle is a circle with different dots going all around it, because everybody thinks that if there's a bullying situation, well, it's just the bully and the targeted student. But there's a whole host of players in between that student that's the offender and the student that is being bullied. So what the bullying circle does is actually ask students to take one of those roles and talk about how it feels to be in that role. So I don't want anybody to think it's the video that you play for students and then you're done. It's a video that really is a good departure point for a discussion with students about this whole issue of bullying.